Hey, City Center Baptist Church family, it's Pastor Brad coming to you from DDQ headquarters. Digging Deeper question number 6 this week asks, we know the Apostle Peter was married. What principles does he share from his marriage that are applicable to ours today? From 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. And how do the following verses 8 through 12, apply within the context of a godly biblical marriage? Matthew 8:14 recounts the story of Jesus healing Peter's mother-in-law of a fever after entering his house in Capernaum. So Peter was married. Wouldn't you love to know his wife's name, what she was like, how his kids turned out, and what she thought of her husband roaming the countryside following the former carpenter's son turned miracle-working rabbi? We sometimes overlook the fact that the disciples were real people with real relationships and real problems, who were trying their best to make it through the rat race of life like the rest of us. It certainly makes them seem more relatable, doesn't it? So when Peter shares marriage principles in his first letter, 1 Peter 3, 1 through 7, he is speaking from experience. He may have learned the hard way from his mistakes. He may have learned from observing other Christian marriages, or he may have had a direct conversation with Jesus, who had been a guest in his house and may have pointed out some issues. We don't know. But Peter has insightful comments about the marriage relationship. He begins by addressing Christian wives in verses 1 through 6. In a culture that undervalued women, Peter begins by addressing them as fully capable and responsible to obey the Lord's commands. Peter elevates them by directly instructing them on how to please the Lord. How exalting and how countercultural. It's also noteworthy that he calls on the women to join Jesus' mission to the world by seeking the salvation of their unbelieving husbands. This would have been a likely reality for many first-century Christian wives who trusted Christ before their husbands. Peter calls them to live a godly life and to exemplify a godly character so as to win their husband's heart for the Lord. What a super significant role to play in God's kingdom. The husbands were then called on to treat their wives respectfully, gently, and graciously, which is exactly how the Lord Jesus treats his bride, the church. The reason Peter gives is so that the husband's prayers might not be hindered. Have you ever realized your prayers may go unanswered because you aren't treating your spouse properly? These were all great commands. But as I kept reading further in 1 Peter 3, I discovered that verses 8 through 12, although not directed specifically at marriages, certainly would be outstanding advice nonetheless. Striving for unity, sympathy, love, tenderness, humility, no revenge seeking but blessing, controlling one's tongue, turning from evil and doing good, and seeking peace. Are these not entirely applicable in a marriage? And the promise of verse 12 is that the Lord's ears will be open to the prayers of his people who practice these principles, but he will set his face against those who disregard these things. I don't know about you, but I prefer God to be for me, not against me. This has been Pastor Brad coming to you from DDQ headquarters.